Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Practical Liberty. My name's Henry Bingaman. Have you ever thought about just leaving everything behind, abandoning everyone you knew, and fleeing to South or Central America? I mean, a lot of us have actually thought about that, but then we think, where would we go? What would we do? There's not the infrastructure there. Well, what if you just left and started building it on your own? That's what my friend JeThoreau, who's coming on the podcast today, has actually done. Left everything he knew behind, moved to El Salvador, the Bitcoin capital of the world, and is actually living life on a Bitcoin standard and promoting a circular Bitcoin economy. All of those terms, if you don't recognize them, don't worry. We're going to get into definitions here. But Jay, actually, what do you want me to call you? Jay Thoreau?
JeThoreau. And yeah. It's an homage to Henry David Thoreau. But first of all, thank you, Henry, for having me on your show, Practical Liberty. I have been a big fan since fairly early on, listened to every single episode, and I've found the insights from both you and your guests to be tremendously beneficial. So, first of all, thank you for having me.
Well,
And
thank you very much. I want people to actually understand that you found me, I think, I don't know, it was probably almost a year into the podcast when I launched through maybe Tom Woods or somebody else that I was on. But you have since become like instrumental in connecting me to some really high powered guests. So if people remember the episodes with Daniel Prince, which was actually one of my favorites that I've ever done, Michelle Weekly, Clint Russell, actually, I think. No, I met him before you, but you have also facilitated some conversations there. So you've just been like a powerhouse behind the scenes, and not just for me, for a lot of other podcasts. So, I mean, you're doing good work on the space.
well, thank you very much. And yeah, I first heard you on the Tom Woods show. I guess that was fall of 2022. I heard your episode about freelancing and found that very compelling, or copywriting, and found that very compelling. But yeah, also then I listened to that a couple times just because I found it was so interesting about a career that gets you out of the machine. And then I looked up your podcast, saw that you had already done an episode with Clint Russell, Liberty Lockdown, whose show I had also been listening to a lot, in addition to Tom Woods and Dave Smith and others like that. And so hearing you there and then seeing that you'd already had Clint Russell on your show was what got me interested. And then I, again, found the insights tremendously useful and just kept listening and listening and listening. And yeah, also longtime Bitcoiner, and for a variety of factors ended up here in El Salvador, where I've been living since August 2023. And it's been a crazy ride, but thank you for having me on.
So I want to get into the what led you to El Salvador in the first place, because it's not the first place. Well, first of all, most people your age, you're like 27 years old, so you're still in your mid 20s. We're calling that. They would be, still trying to get on their feet in America. They'd be struggling to make it work, or starting a good career. Like, I know you have a decent college education background. Like, you have some good technical skills. So can you get into the backstory of what made you look around America and go, yo, I got to bail? Like, what were the precipitating events that led up to that?
Well, the short answer was 2020. The backstory behind that's most essential was Ron Paul. I'm from Washington, D.C., home of the Federal Reserve, but,
Boo.
boo, exactly. And Ron Paul is how I first learned about the Federal Reserve, through his book, End the Fed. He became well known through the 2008 and 2012 presidential campaigns. And I was growing up in the D.C. area, and politics always felt very real to me. As a result, I was born in the city, grew up just on the other side of the Pentagon. So I'd drive past that on my way to school in DC. And yeah, just seeing the White House and all these, like, Congress, all these other buildings in person, it always felt like these aren't just ideas in the newspaper. These things actually are real world, tangible, places and people, when their decisions have consequences on the world. I increasingly came to realize. I ended up studying economics, majoring in quantitative economics, actually, trying to study the Keynesian perspective, in large part, trying to disprove the Austrian perspective that I'd first encountered in 2012 through Ron Paul's campaign. And just, also minored in mathematical statistics, ended up going into a data analytics route, because the more I studied, the more I read of Austrian economics books separately, the more convinced I became that the Austrian economists were correct in their perspective on economics, But data analytics and statistics are still tremendously valuable tools and frameworks for thinking about the world. Same with economics in terms of like as a science of decision making, making rational decisions about resource allocation, scarce resources over time. And yeah, anyway, I got into data analytics, decided not to get into politics or economics, despite that having been a possibility coming from DC. Focused on data analytics and was just getting started. Had just been hired as a junior data engineer for a software as a service startup in 2020 when the lockdowns happened. And yeah, let's
So
just
just walk
say
me through like your where were you? It's not necessarily politically, but it's because we kind of know you couldn't disprove the Austrian model, no matter how hard you tried in college. I just know this because it's a fact. But there's so I assume you had some libertarian type leanings already, but on a level of you know, burn the Fed to the ground tomorrow to like, well, yeah, that's not ideal, but it's going to be fine. In 2019, where were you on the extremism scale between those two options?
philosophically, I was still fully convinced that the Federal Reserve was wrong. I also was not a Bitcoiner yet. I thought gold was the best that the Austrians had to offer in terms of actual solutions, because the Austrian economists are correct in diagnosing or in the framework of understanding the world from first principles in terms of human action.
Right.
But
Yeah,
sorry,
this is what the distinction I always try to make between kind of Keynesian economics and Austrian economics is Keynesian economics is arrogantly prescriptive, and Austrian economics is simply descriptive. It's just describing how things work. So
yeah.
it doesn't actually have solutions. It doesn't tell you what the perfect thing is. It just describes incentives and how people behave and react to different incentives, essentially.
Yeah, and that's actually interesting. In data analytics, there are different types of analytical projects, and there some are descriptive, and others are prescriptive, and then others are predictive, like predictive models, and that's where the Keynesians love projecting things onto the future, and then of course they use those models to then justify policies. Yeah,
Yeah, I
but
just can't get behind calling it predictive when they've never predicted anything accurately. Like you could say you're trying to do predictions, but it's just all these models are they work in the very, very shortest term, almost kind of. But if you extend anything out a decade, you have no idea what's going to happen. Like, and I mean that with any model, essentially.
yeah, there's a one of the main science sayings in data science is all models are wrong, some are useful.
Yeah,
And there are many cases where predictive analytics can be useful, like for predicting the weather based on certain conditions, but extrapolating long term over time, and more importantly, the Keynesians and the politicians manipulate how the definitions of the measurements is
yeah,
where it
yeah,
really gets insidious with Keynesian economics compared to Austrian economics, which breaks things down from first principles, all about individual human action. Value is subjective, and then voluntary exchange is how economies essentially scale from from the fundamental unit to the entire world.
yeah.
And yeah,
All right.
anyway,
So on the level of extremism we were talking about, you were like philosophically you understood what the Fed was doing, but you were. It sounds like it was kind of like so many other people, like I was at the moment. Like, yes, I understand that's wrong, but like, whatever. What are you gonna do? Is that how you would describe where you were at?
yeah, basically, yeah, I was honestly pretty depressed about it, like earlier in college, 2015, like 2016, and then yeah, decided to just focus on data analytics and just trying to survive as best as I can, try to enjoy life. And then 2020 happens,
Hmm.
right when I finally started, get breaking into the professional world. Yeah, settled into a startup working in data analytics, and specifically junior data engineer. So uh, providing analytical support for software pipeline design, essentially. It was really fascinating work with fascinating technology tools. And so I had become basically completely distracted from economics by this point. But then they locked down the economy. And in the meantime, over the previous couple months while I was doing a data analytics boot camp, I had moved back from college, and one of my old high school friends had started getting into Bitcoin, had started telling me about it. And I was very focused on data analytics and just kind of ignored him. He would tell me, and I'd tune it out, and like he'd send me another link, and I'd focus on my work. And then the lockdowns happened, and suddenly I had more time, more distracted, and more importantly, I had the reason of seeing the entire global economy being shut down, and then trillions and trillions of dollars being printed to paper it over. And my latent Austrian economics understanding and that sort of underlying Rothbardian rage was reawoken by this outright theft. Honestly, the transfer of wealth of trillions of dollars, over 40% of small businesses in the country shut down. Land of the free, home of the brave. I focus more on solutions these days, but that really got me to start paying attention. And I started learning about Bitcoin, and I ended up being furloughed a few. The software as a service startup, their main source of revenue was a single corporation, an airline, and won't say which one. But when the lockdowns happened, the primary source of revenue for the startup was suddenly massively impaired, and so that threw me off for a little while. But I was able to stack some Bitcoin. I actually started writing online, just dabbling in the meantime about some soccer analytics, like soccer tactics and analytics and stuff. So that was sort of my first venture into the online writing world. But in the meantime, I actually then used an article about data analytics for analyzing a team as um, I sent that as part of the job application for my next role, data analytics consultant. And
Mhm.
yeah, was able to stack more Bitcoin, and then you know did that for maybe 4 or 5 months, something like that. And then along came the jab mandates in late
Oh yeah.
2021. And
Was that late? Were the mandates late 2021? It felt like the pressure was there from the beginning of like late 2020, actually, right? When they first announced that they had these things. And it was like, we're giving them to old people first, but you got to get in line. You got to like book your appointments for January, February, depending on your age. We'll let you know. I mean, I remember thinking in the beginning, like, wait, you were saying like 6 months ago, there's no way these will be ready for 3 or 4 years at least. Most vaccines get 10 years of testing. And now they're saying instantly on a dime, they turned and they said, like, you better line up in February or March for a healthy 30, whatever I was, 34, 35-year-old at the time. Sounded crazy already. But the mandates, I guess you're right, didn't come till later that year when they realized that people like you and I were too stubborn to just go along with their um, propaganda campaign, essentially.
well, exactly. And so the mandate, or the vaccines were first approved, their emergency use authorization, right after the elections in November 2020. Interesting timing. But
Yeah.
they started off with the friendly approach. Uh, First of all, they were a limited supply because this process that would normally take a decade was rushed, Operation Warp Speed. And then, yes, after the elections, November 2020, they started rolling them out. January, February, it was like elderly priority or are the priorities, healthcare workers, the nurses, the frontline workers
Oh
were some of
yeah.
the first people. And then by the end of that the year, those same frontline workers were then later being mandated. But yes, it was sort of just a slow, turning the knob, like the frog boiling pot, but just steadily twisting that dial up over the course of a
It's
year.
I'm reading Tom Wood's Diary of a Psychosis right now, and I say I'm reading it. I keep having to put it down because I keep like he literally wrote about this every day as it was going on, and so he has like a daily digest of the insanity that was going on. And people look back and they say like, "Oh, you guys are nitpicking because nobody could have known this was dangerous at the beginning." And I'm like, "You read this book, it's clear like people did know, and he was citing other people that knew, so like we weren't crazy for being skeptical in the beginning. Like the evidence was there. The gaslighting from the beginning, people have forgotten how bad it was, that they were just lying about everything obviously from the beginning. People were so scared they went along with it.
Mhm. Yeah,
But I keep telling people like buy Tom's book, but don't read it right away. I'm still too mad. Like I can't get through. I normally read a book in like 2 or 3 days. It's been weeks. I read a
yeah,
chapter. I'm like, Argh.
yeah. I want to buy the book to support him, and because I'm sure it is a outstanding record of what happened. he is a historian, and he's a very compelling writer, and he's certainly well capable of making the case and telling the story as it needs to be told. But I know if I get it, I will just be furious. And it's kind of hard to get books shipped here to El Salvador anyway so far.
Sure.
But yeah, more on that later, I guess.
All right, so let's get back to the jab mandates come. You're working at a new company. I know we don't want to just throw people under the bus here, but it was a company that was big enough to have been and connected enough to have been kind of pressured enough, let's say, by government sources, right?
Yes. And honestly, actually, it was a government contractor firm. I won't get more specific than that, but after being burned by working for a software as a service startup and seeing how the government had treated businesses, small businesses, I thought, okay, well, at least I can get a more stable job if it's with the government. Stack more Bitcoin because I was way down the Bitcoin rabbit hole by this point
Okay.
after a full year. But so I was willing to compromise in the short term to get more Bitcoin to reduce the size of government in the long run.
All right.
But then I learned my lesson here from playing fiat games, win fiat prizes. Uh, it ended up being that the mandates were specifically applied through OSHA for government employees and government contractors with businesses over 100 people. And that was kind of the size I was attracted to for because what I never really wanted to work for a corporation. I
Yeah.
the startup was like 25, 30 people, maybe something like that. And then this one was 120, something like that. And it was actually fully remote. So I thought I would be insulated from the mandates by the fact that it was fully remote, and then insulated from the government potentially coming in and just shutting businesses down by the fact that it is the government. I figured I would start benefiting from that Cantillon effect to, get some of the solution. And by positioning myself closer to the money printer, a business that gets its revenue primarily from the government, which gets its revenue primarily from printing and paying for it through inflation, which is punishing savers. Anyway, I thought it made
Yeah.
sense, and I found out the hard way that play fiat games, win fiat prizes. So
So you ended up. I mean, I'm sure they called it voluntarily leaving, but when they're coercing you that much, you have it's quit or take the shot, and if you can't be coerced, like you literally, I know people disagree with me on this, but I don't believe that anybody should have compromised on this. If you knew what that shot was, you should not have compromised, no matter what your even if you were going to get fired. There would be enough people. If everybody had stood up, they would have had to stop it faster. There's no and I know. I mean, I know some nurses and doctors who got hired back because they got fired because they wouldn't take the shot, and now they're getting hired back and they're suing because it's obvious now that what you did was bullshit in the beginning. So it's hard to stand together. But I mean, you did the right thing by quitting. So the next question is, because you didn't go to El Salvador exactly right away. There's a little bit of, and it's actually an interesting debate between Bitcoiners. There's we're going to outlast the government, so we're going to stay here and fight. And we'll be here to rebuild as soon as this fiat monster collapses and their currency proves worthless and like the power structures self destruct as they're on the path to do. And then there's the people that go, no, I'm going to leave and build something better somewhere else. Like we can start over. I'm sure you had the debate between in your own head about which way to go. Well, first of all, I guess, is that true? Did you have that debate or was it always like, nope, I'm out. I saw what this monster is. I don't want to be close to it.
yeah, well, I mean, like I said, 2020 was a real wake up call, and then it wasn't really until 2023 with the Silicon Valley bank run when I was like, okay, that was when I really decided to leave. I guess it was sort of a slow creep in the middle. I you know, I do still really care about America. I used to, I still love the idea of what America is supposed to be.
Right.
Land of the free, home of the brave, Declaration of Independence, and the Bill of Rights. Philosophically, I do basically agree with the full anarcho-capitalist Rothbardian perspective, but I'm I would be perfectly happy with constitutional minarchism if it's actually good government, like what the founding fathers intended. And you could get into the whole Lysander Spooner argument. Either the Constitution created this or failed to prevent it or whatever. But yeah, anyway,
Yeah, if you lived in a culture that actually valued individual liberty and property rights and all that stuff, you can live like there is no utopia. You're going to live with some BS no matter where you are. So if you're in a place that historically did, at least culturally, protect property rights and value the individual, and yeah, there's some things. Obviously, the Constitution didn't stop any of this from happening, but it took them a couple hundred years to get to the. Well, no, it took them 100 years to really get to a point where things started falling apart, and then another 100 years before it became what it is today. So you're like, it's. I mean, yeah, it was actually a way. It was an innovation in governance, in world governance. So, like, yes, I understand the arguments, and but look, I'll take a reset where this happens again in 200 years, but give me the next like 200 years to work through it. So sorry, I'm rambling a little bit, but it's yes, I'm with you where I understand philosophically what the ideal society would look like, but I would be perfectly happy to just reverse course from where we're going now and get back closer to where we started.
Mm. Yeah, and the problem is things just keep moving in the wrong direction in the US. I think things are gonna have to get worse there before they get better, and we saw that with El Salvador, and we're seeing that now with Argentina. It like El Salvador went through, the civil war in the 80s and then decades of gang warfare, murder capital of the world, before they finally elected a third party, Bukele, that cleaned that up. And then he happened all, which that is controversial among Bitcoiners, but he also paired it with economic liberty, and in particular Bitcoin, and has embraced, a certain amount of freedom, certainly to a much greater extent than the US does, land of the free, home of the brave. And you stated goal of becoming debt free by 2030, whereas the US, just passed another $1 trillion spending bill middle of the night. The
Mm.
inflationary debt spiral just keeps accelerating. I think it's 35 trillion now for the national debt, well over 100 trillion unfunded liabilities, social security, Medicare, Medicaid, all the endless wars. It's just getting worse and worse, and they're bleeding the middle class dry. They're inflating away people's savings. It's it's a mess, and things. Uh, I think it could be salvaged. I think a lot of Americans get what's happening increasingly, but we saw with Argentina that they had to reach, inflation levels over 100%, which that's something Americans just don't have any understanding of, really.
But
A
the
currency at 100% inflation rate, how devastating that is. It-
So I yes, I mean, yes, they have no idea. I don't think actually the U.S. will get to 100% inflation rate just because so many people use and rely on the dollar that it's going. The international demand is big enough that you won't get to those Argentinian levels. But I do. I think the currency could actually just disappear or be rug pulled a little bit by a national divorce. So like, I actually like Argentina didn't have the same like civil strife that's happening in the US right now. So like when they hit the economic crisis to like something that would horrify like what was it? Argentinians were losing weight because they couldn't afford food. I mean Venezuela had that too. Like it when you have these currency crises, there's real world effects. I think people like kind of they see it as a theoretical, maybe that'll happen, academic possibility. But when it happens, people die, literally die. Um, but I think the U.S. is just going to break up. I don't see how it could stay together with this everything going on.
Yeah, well, and Tom Woods has the book National Divorce, and the URL nationaldivorce.com. But
Yeah,
yeah, I think and many Bitcoiners agree with like the sovereign individual thesis of things more, balkanizing, and centralized nation states losing their grip through freedom technology, enabling decentralization and power restoring back to the individual. And I think we will start to see that play out, especially as things get worse. Yeah, with Malay, it's interesting because, just to finish that point, it, the Argentinian people are not fully libertarian, but the currency getting bad enough was what prompted them to take a chance on somebody who is, openly a serious Austrian economist, fan of Rothbard and Hayek and all of Mises and all of them. And I don't know. I think people are, now that our ideas are starting to be proven out increasingly in real time, I think we're going to see pockets of the US start to realize it, maybe. But yeah, like California and Texas and Florida, in New York. Like they, they're barely the same country at this point.
Yeah, it's and I don't like they were never supposed to be. That was like the idea of a state being what Americans consider a state. Like a state has always meant a nation state, a country. Like the United States, it was supposed to be an alliance of, individual countries. So this is like the back to the roots of the country. It didn't see itself as one thing. It was really the propaganda leading up to the world wars. Well, the Civil War and then the world wars, more the Civil War, I guess. Um, that kind of created this new mythology about what the United States should be. Otherwise, it used to be you consider yourself a Floridian or a Pennsylvanian or New Yorker. Like
Mm,
it this
Virginian.
United States identity wasn't there. A Virginian, yeah, Mister Virginia up there.
Yeah. Well, and
Um,
it's kind of funny, like Washington D.C. has grown as its own identity despite not being a state. It's been interesting to see it kind of absorb some of Maryland and Virginia into its own bubble. It,
yeah,
and that may be part of actually why, to your question about why I was so quick to leave, is I think, and to your point about the dollar being the last fiat currency to fail, I definitely agree with that. It's like the dollar milkshake theory.
yeah,
It is the most stable of the fiat currencies, and that's actually kind of an advantage that for Bitcoin adoption here in El Salvador. We're a bit all over the place with topics, but I think it's been an advantage that El Salvador had already switched to the dollar instead of having their own extremely inflated currency because it did provide this alternative that is more stable while Bitcoin is still only 15 years old. It's still early in its price discovery phase. And it has proven its track record at establishing itself as a store of value already is phenomenal. It's $1 trillion asset class. It passed the market cap of silver, one of the world's oldest forms of money.
right.
Bitcoin, 15 years, has already reached that level. But yeah, I think it is volatile because it is still so small compared to the well-established fiat currencies and that have been around, over 100 years. And while things are still volatile, it actually helps to have some stability, I think, for the lower class people who do not have the battery of savings to just handle the volatility.
Yeah.
Their profit margins are literally just like a few dollars per day or per week or whatever. And Bitcoin's price fluctuating, it'll be interesting to see how things play out over the next few years. I won't pretend to know the future, but
No, it really will. I don't know that I don't know that you're ever going to have the vast majority of people in the world like buying their daily groceries or weekly groceries with a Bitcoin standard. I think Bitcoin's more likely to be the backstop currency, the larger store of value that's traded between big institutions, and then there'll be some second layer option tied to Bitcoin. Everybody's saying like my dad has always talked about like I would like something like Bitcoin if only there was like a basket of gold that backed it. And I think the opposite is probably going to be true. There's going to be different things that are backed by Bitcoin in the future, because that's the only way that this actually scales up. And if you actually look at the economics of Bitcoin, I mean, it's the numbers sound stupid when you first hear how much a Bitcoin could be worth, especially if you take it out a decade or two. Like it doesn't sound realistic. It sounds insane. But you look at the economics of it, and again, it's not it's just descriptive, not predictive. This is what is happening. Look at what has happened over the last 15 years. What's going to happen over the next 15 years? Again, we don't know for sure, but if these incentives all stay the same, then the trajectory continues.
yeah,
Which,
and I've been so focused on living here on a Bitcoin standard and excuse me, building, the podcast studio and conference and stuff that I'm actually a bit rusty on the economics arguments. But that being said, like in terms of the exact data numbers, there are $1 trillion asset classes like sovereign debt bonds are some X hundred number of trillions, real estate, few hundred trillion. It adds up to something like 900 trillion total
yeah,
wealth in the world. And Bitcoin is establishing itself as the apex store of value asset, apex treasury reserve asset. It's
exactly. That is the argument. When all national currencies have to be backed by Bitcoin, you have the largest asset ever in human history that probably that ever will be because it's the hardest form of money ever.
Well,
So
and that's
it's
the point worth emphasizing is only 21 million total Bitcoins will ever exist. And within each of those 21 million, there are 100 million Satoshis. So it's actually, yeah, it's, yeah, 2.1 quadrillion total
right
Satoshis. So it can handle, it scales down just fine. But, and
for a
the
while.
point is, what nobody can control the supply issuance. So at a time when we're seeing governments and government money, which is what fiat currency is, if I had to define fiat currency in two words, it would be government debt. And if I had to pick two more words, it would be pure evil. But more technically, government debt.
Yeah,
And
yeah, it just means by dictate, right? I mean,
well,
essentially that they're telling you what it is. Like you don't have a choice on it. It's
exa-
only there because of the power that they claim they have.
well,
So yeah,
exactly. And in fiat lux, the phrase is in the Latin Bible, let there be light. It's like, the fiat
sure.
money, let there be money. The
Uh-huh.
central bankers think of themselves as the gods of the economy. And of course, they're not. It's just an excuse for them to steal people's savings and to fund programs that, align with their special interests. The term is literally special interests in DC. With-
Yeah. Yeah,
don't even
that's
get me
good.
started on
Funny.
politics too deep, but
Well, let's actually
it's
talk more about El Salvador politics because I'm very curious what you're doing there. So, all right, one more step before we get to Berlin, which is what I really wanted to talk about because it's actually one of the more fascinating projects I think happening maybe in the world. I don't know. It's the most dedicated attempt to build a circular economy that I've actually seen. The one that's actually catching some traction. So teaser, but when you showed up in El Salvador, what was the plan originally? Because you had never even heard of Berlin. I just listened to your podcast. You didn't. That was not your plan to end up in the mountain town of Berlin, El Salvador. So, what was when you were leaving? What was your plan? Like, where'd you go? And yeah, what were you thinking when you got there? What was the actual plan?
Yeah, so well, the plan was to just come and explore and find out in large part. There's more to it than just that, but it was in large part a fact-finding mission. I'm actually still here on a tourist visa. I do intend to, settle down here longer term, but it was an exploratory mission and just figuring out what's possible with growing a circular economy. I guess backing up slightly. So, what prompted me to move here was the Silicon Valley bank run in March 2023. And that was the moment where it was really like, okay, the fractional reserve banking system, the your money in the bank is not yours. It's not money, and it's not really in the bank. The bank lends out in terms of like, so fractional reserves, there's a reserve ratio where the bank would have to hold, say, 10% of your deposits, but then they could loan out the other 90%. So then if you went to claim less than 10% of your deposits at any one time, your money would be in the bank. But any more than that, it's not there. And
Well,
then
and now it's not even the 10%. Like that was the original idea when they scaled it down, and now it's just it's all made up money in the banks these days.
well, exactly.
They have some cash on hand, but they do not have anywhere close. It's like 1% of reserves or something. It's absolute madness.
Yeah. You give these central planners an inch and it just evolves into a mountain over time. Just the inertia of bureaucratic bloat. But um what was I
So
saying right
Silicon
now?
Valley Bank was the real impetus to get you to be like, I gotta go. This
Yes.
thing's
Okay. Yeah. So in 2020 they had reduced the fractional reserve requirements to 0%.
right.
So your money in the bank wasn't like they didn't have to have any of it there.
Yeah.
It was the entire economy is just this bubble of, you know, it, it's a house of cards. It's
It's a pyramid
largely
scheme, yeah,
illusory.
whatever you want to call it. It's fake. It's total fake bullshit.
Yeah. But one of the most powerful things about Bitcoin is self custody. You can actually control this asset. It's 12 you and you alone have access to your Bitcoin when you take self custody.
Right.
Instead of trusting it to some third party, it allows property rights in a way that had never existed before, in conjunction with Bitcoin being the invention of absolute digital scarcity. it's reinforced that the money supply is fixed, so they can't print more and they can't steal it from you. They can't confiscate it from you unless they do like a $5 wrench attack and just like torture it out of you essentially. But they can't just remotely confiscate it from you. There are ways to store it securely. And if you have a secure connection, like if you have internet, you can send it to other people. And so it can't be censored, it can't be confiscated, and your purchasing power can't be inflated away. And just seeing this complete contrast compared to not only the fractional reserve banking system and seeing that how that was just a house of cards, but then also seeing how even the land of the free, home of the brave could go full authoritarian, seeing the Canadian truckers with the bank runs, and seeing how people who donated to the Freedom Convoy
Right.
at a time when the Omicron variant, when 100% safe and effective had been proven to be at the very least wrong. I would say a lie, but at the very least wrong objectively. The Freedom Convoy, people were punished for donating to that, to supporting freedom of speech. Their bank accounts their funds were seized. They were put on lists for donating. That's
Yeah.
your money in the bank in the fiat system. And Bitcoin is just this polar opposite. I was 3 years down the rabbit hole by that point, and I had accumulated enough savings to the point where I thought, am I really going to pretend like I was wrong about COVID and try to get another data analytics job with like go grovel to these people who caved to one of the things that I found most offensive about the COVID tyranny is that they lied about the measurements. And especially like with the new experimental medical prophylactic technology that they advertised as safe and effective. If you looked into the data and if you looked into the way they were trying to hide the data, and if you've looked into testimony about the data after the fact, it was obvious that the authoritarian push, especially on people in my age demographic, healthy men in their 20s, were the most likely to be at risk for myocarditis or similar side effects, and the least likely to be in need, like the least likely to have any upside. And younger people were even less likely to have any upside. So when seeing them push it on children was even more insane. But
Oh,
anyway,
it's
I wasn't going to pretend I was wrong. I had these savings. Bitcoin is freedom money. And I figured, you know what? I could get out of here. I see this need for Bitcoin, despite being volatile. It is secure, it is reliable. And when you see a bank run in a bank, like a very, you know, prominent bank with a big capital reserve base, just be complete so quickly revealed to be insecure like that, and just I really wanted to start seeing if it was possible to actually have a parallel Bitcoin economy and to actually live full time on it. And then also won't get into the politics of war, but also just finding it like disgusting knowing what fiat dollars are used to fund. It it,
Oh yeah.
it
This
goes
this
for
would be this would be after the Ukraine war had started, but before the Israel Gaza war has started. So like you were you went out for I mean, and this is well after Iraq and Afghanistan and the just catastrophe after catastrophe that causes the next catastrophe that we have to print money to create a different catastrophe so we can fund the next catastrophe. Like the cycle is literally when you sit there and trace it out, it hurts your head. Not just to realize how much money has been wasted and value has been stolen from people, but the millions and millions of people that have been killed in your name to steal your money to give to contractors outside of DC. It it's one of the more evil things that has happened in human history, honestly.
Yeah, and I just refused to support it, and I had enough Bitcoin saved up where I could afford, at least for a little while, to live on money that I see as, fix the money, fix the world. Money is the incentives make the world go round. And essentially, I see Bitcoin as like the ultimate flipping of the switch of incentives at the base layer society away from, you know, away from the central planning, the cancel-on effect, and all of the consequences of them being able to fund whatever their own agendas are at the expense of everybody else, hide it through the hidden tax of inflation, and I just
Right.
refuse to support it anymore. And I see this, I hear about El Salvador. El Salvador had made Bitcoin legal tender in 2021, And I heard about Bitcoin Beach, this circular economy where people were able to actually live on Bitcoin. And, you know, and then I started hearing, I'd been listening to a lot of Bitcoin podcasts by this point, and I heard
So just
some of
I
the,
don't mean to interrupt. I just want to just to define terms in case people haven't listened to some of the other episodes I've done. When we're talking about a circular economy, let me just see if I can define it. It's an economy that when you're spending money there, it's not like you're spending a Bitcoin there. It stays in the economy and circles around. So you go to the butcher, you spend a Bitcoin. The Bitcoin pays his employee who goes and buys his own groceries and milk with the Bitcoin. Who then the money stays in the economy and circulates, right? So it's a fully functional, self-sustained system, unlike like where most companies take a Bitcoin, they immediately cash it out for fiat dollars or something else. So a Bitcoin economy is where people are actually transacting in Bitcoin in a circular way. How
yeah.
did I do that right?
Yeah, I think that's fair. And
Okay.
it's still a relatively new concept that wasn't really possible before the invention of the Lightning Network around like 2017 or so. And the Lightning Network, long story short, Bitcoin on chain is the apex store of value asset for a variety of complicated reasons. It's not ideal for instantaneous transactions. The Lightning Network is a layer 2 technology way. It's a way of using Bitcoin instantaneously.
Yes.
And
I was just at my dad's birthday party over the weekend, and my aunt was asking me about Bitcoin because I won't shut up about this stuff. So she's like, "But how do you even spend it?" So I just pulled out a Lightning wallet and I was like, "Well, here's how I would say I want $100 in Bitcoin," and I pulls up a QR code, and then I switched over to send. It was like, "Here's what I would do to scan that," and then it would just instantly happen. And she's like, "Wait, that what? How does that work?" I was like, "It doesn't matter how it works exactly. It works. I've done it multiple times." Because this is the other thing. I've started buying anybody that has a Bitcoin, a Lightning option to buy online. I instantly do it because it's a better way to spend money. It's an easier, better interaction. I've been burned one time so far,
wow.
and it's I didn't. So it was a technical hiccup where I scanned it. It created the invoice. This is actually just why we need better technology and more people working on these problems because it created the invoice for the thing I was buying, and I scanned it to pay, and the payment went through, and then it said, "Oh, you need to log into your account for the for your shipping address." So they got the payment and then had no idea who it was, and I emailed customer service, and we were going back and forth because you have the record of the transaction, and they said they were going to ship it, but that was 3 weeks ago, and I feel like it got lost in the hustle. Like, but this is a company I've done business with before in Bitcoin, and they were honest. I feel like this just got lost in the hustle. So I think technology would, like, there's no way a credit card would have gone through like that. It's just a matter of there haven't been enough people using it to discover all the problems that are going to go wrong in those types of cases.
Right. This is cutting edge technology, and I will say to the point about it being easier, and to the point about even like a 70-year-old can figure it out. It I've loved here in Berlin that family-owned businesses, across generation, different members of the family are learning how to use Bitcoin specifically because their first impression of it is Lightning, which just makes it
Yeah.
so easy to pay instantaneously for the pupusas or whatever they're selling. You know,
Right.
the 70-year-old lady who makes the pupusas can pull up a QR herself and get this cutting edge monetary technology, beamed to
Yes.
her phone instantaneously.
And then
Is
actually own the money that she gets from it.
Well, exactly, and it's kind of funny.
I
We
mean,
like talking
you got
about
to
the.
move it to self custody. I mean, it's not. There's another step in the way, but
I was just about to say, yeah, and that's the other thing is, so in contrast with the Silicon Valley bank run as well, right? Because it's like your money in the bank isn't really your money in the bank, and kind of part of the pitch for Bitcoin is that your money is yours. It is sound money, and it is in the bank. Like, you are your own bank.
right.
You can store your net worth in your head. But then for the Lightning Network, it's possible to do in a self custody way if you are tech savvy enough to run your own node. And even that's becoming increasingly easier. But there are also custodial options where you can still have this money that no government can, at least government or corporation can change the value of.
Right.
And third party services make it easier to use, kind of like pocket change is how I think of it. So you've got your
Yeah.
cold storage, self custody for your savings, and then your hot wallet is the amount that you would be okay with losing if you get hacked or robbed or whatever.
Right.
You know, like if you take a physical wallet into a dangerous neighborhood, you're not bringing your entire life savings.
That's exactly
It-
how I look at it. Is it's just like carrying around a physical wallet. It's easier to steal than it is if it's like locked up in a vault somewhere. But you're not going to put your life savings in your wallet and walk around. So unless you're really stupid about it, it's going to hurt. It sucks to get robbed no matter what happens, but you're not going to be devastated by it unless you had everything you own in that hot wallet.
yeah. In longer term, like Bitcoin actually makes it harder to rob people because you can do multi-chain. There are a variety of ways where you can split up custody or diversify where you hold your Bitcoin to make it harder to rob, and you don't physically carry it around. It's not like a bar of gold where you can just
Right.
physically have it taken from you. You can memorize 12 words in your head, you can smash your physical wallet, and you can reboot on another wallet with those same 12 words. So it makes it harder to steal your full savings, but then custodial options make it easier to use. And one of the interesting things we've seen building up the early stage circular economy here in Berlin is some of the merchants who started accepting Bitcoin for pupusas, small margins, over time have accumulated enough to the point where it is worth extracting into cold storage. And so
Oh
that's
yeah.
that's when things really start leveling up.
Well, especially if you consider the price is it's up 150% over the past from the trough to the peak. I'm not talking about in like where most people have it, but I mean it's up significantly. So let's say even if you're just a middle income Salvadorian, you had what used to be $1,000 in Sats is now $2,500 in Sats. That's actually a huge difference in an economy that's in the developing stages where theirs is.
Yeah,
Like
and
that's
especially,
enough to live for a couple months for a couple people, like for a person
yeah,
in certain circumstances.
and to significantly upgrade the quality of their life or to
Yeah,
save long term for their children.
to the
It
point
opens
where
up
it
so
would.
many
Yeah,
possibilities.
exactly.
And one of the things that's really been, incredibly conducive to the growth here in Berlin is that the project, the circular economy project, was started by two Salvadorans, Gerardo and Evelyn, and they started it during a bear market. So price was like 20K thereabouts, and then now it is, as of today, 70K US dollars, fiat denominated price for one full Bitcoin.
We
So
understand.
yeah, it's
Yeah,
more than tripled since the circular economy project was started here. So a lot of the early adopters now, like the
yeah.
ones who got onboarded first, are seeing the rewards of that already, and it's really just helped accelerate the growth. It just it creates a bit of FOMO. Other people see the merchants who started accepting it getting more business from Bitcoin tourists like me who you basically refuse to use dollars. So they're missing out on business, and then they see the value of that business making the people who did accept Bitcoin, their savings go up, and then that's it's,
So this is another thing that we talked about offline on a different call. Actually, is when I first encountered Bitcoin in 2011, I was like, the concept is fascinating, but there's been a lot of really good ideas that are going nowhere in the world because you have to get mass adoption for this type of thing to catch on, and people just aren't going to abandon the dollar. They're not looking for a new form of money. There's always going to be the people that just want gold. Gold's never going to lose all its value. I had all the same arguments that most people had. The thing that convinced me was actually finally going Bitcoin maxi, not just looking at it as an opportunity to make money. Um, and then being around Bitcoiners, like other people that saw it. And I think in our last discussion, we kind of decided that the defining factor of Bitcoiner, like the thing that makes us, I don't know, a cohesive group, and the thing that gives me confidence in Bitcoin is we have a different view of time preference. Do you want, because this was your argument, so I kind of want to let you lay it out a little bit. Can you walk through the time preference version of why Bitcoiners are just a different quality of person? Because that's really what it is. It's a different caliber of human being that you're dealing with in the Bitcoin community, and that's why I'm so convinced now that like you can't get rid of this.
yeah. Well, that actually reminds me of another point that I wanted to make, and part of why I became such a fan of your podcast, Henry, is the Levels of Liberty episode. You
Hmm.
had the cornerstones of liberty. security, wealth, awareness, and network. And one of the things that I learned through my experience, my early career experience, and the COVID tyranny and how that kind of all got derailed is awareness and network are the two most important of those. Because if you build your network without a shared foundation of values and awareness, then your wealth and security are, you know, significantly more at risk, let's say.
Yeah.
So you need to surround yourself with people who share your values long term if you want a safer career. You know, people you get along with and can actually form a sustainable economic community with long term, because you actually get along, you actually provide value to each other. And I've found that the fiat world was desperately lacking that, and I have found the Bitcoin community to be overflowing with it.
Yeah.
Um, it's hard to even describe just the range and depth of knowledge that the early adopters of this paradigm shifting technology, it it's astonishing. It's some of the smartest programmers, like physicists, economists, like people, like engineers specializing in mining, the mining side of Bitcoin, like optimizing energy in all sorts of like creative ways from stranded sources of energy. It's it's astonishing just the range of talent that is drawn to this paradigm shift for all sorts of different reasons. And once people get it and they see others who also get it, and we see that most of the world still doesn't get it,
Yeah.
there's a certain level of camaraderie that is, it's just the most natural thing in the world, but it's also so rare. Like I've never really seen it in any other community, but I wouldn't be able to move to this country, to this third world country where I barely speak the language on a tourist visa, and be able to start contributing to a new, circular economy of some new technology, any other cryptocurrency, or any like data analytics. I wouldn't be able to just move to, let's say, like,
Right.
I don't know, Panama had a strong data analytics career. I don't feel like I would just be able to move there on a tourist visa, barely speak the language, and be able to organize a conference in a new circular economy with over 100 people committed to coming so far, and like be able to just be so embraced into a project that was already going without me. And they've been doing it, like, they all got on board with just my crazy ideas of what's possible because they see it too. We all see how bad things are getting in fiat world, and the Bitcoiners who really get it see how bad things are getting in fiat world. We see how Bitcoin has this incredible potential to fix those problems, fix the money, fix the world, and we just see it as like we're all on the same mission. I don't know.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting thing because most things that have made cultures and groups cohere are it's shared location, it's shared family, it's shared history. And I feel like that has been massively accelerated by Bitcoin. So Bitcoiners, there's just not a lot of idiots right now in the Bitcoin maxi world. Um, right? The idiots haven't gotten it. The scammers, you can't gamify, you can't game Bitcoin right now. It's too big to game. Like you can pump and dump some of these other crypto scams that are out there, but you can't play with Bitcoin yet, so they're not interested in it, right? There might be some jerks holding Bitcoin, but they're not part of what you would call the Bitcoin community. So it's this shared belief and vision that it really almost instantly bonds people together. Even if they're like you have nothing else in common, if you're both Bitcoiners, it's like you have something. You have like a core. You almost can't have nothing else in common because you at least have the time preference, um, understanding of the world.
Speaking of time preference, I never even got around to that part of your question because I wanted to segue out to the cornerstones of liberty, this
Yes.
shared foundation of awareness, and then network effects on top of having people who just really get it, and then become wealthier and more secure together on top of that. And that's
Right.
kind of what I see happening, with parallel economies. There's this big meme of citadels among Bitcoiners. It's like you don't just buy Bitcoin for the Lamborghinis, right? You don't just come for number go up, right? For fiat
People
denominated gains. I
Bitcoiners Bitcoiners that had Lamborghinis would be selling it to buy more Bitcoin. Like that's the level. It's the difference actually. Is if you had a Lamborghini and became a Bitcoiner, you'd sell the Lamborghini to get the Bitcoin.
Exactly. And some people came, some people did sell their Bitcoins for Lamborghinis early on.
Yeah,
Bitcoin
they
is
were
for
playing the game.
anyone. What?
They were just playing a game though. They were playing an investment game. They speculated and won. But
Exactly.
they didn't win because they didn't understand. They didn't win as much as they could.
Exactly. They were thinking of it as just an investment and not as the global upgrade of money for
Yeah,
all of like humanity never had sound money that could scale across space and time before
right.
Bitcoin and be reliably scarce and preserve value. Um, it just once people understand it, it's like early adopters of the internet. It they're it's complicated and there are a lot of natural filters for hanging around. Even people who are smart but who just see it as a shallow investment and
Yeah.
then they sell it for Lamborghinis, they miss out on a lot of potential future gains. I think the way there's actually a cliche among Bitcoiners. It's like came for the Lambos, stayed for the revolution, and I would describe Bitcoin as a globally decentralized, peaceful monetary revolution or evolution, if you want to be a little bit more positive about it in terms of like, not.
I'll take the revolution over the evolution. Revolutions
Yeah,
tend to happen faster than evolutions.
yeah, it's definitely more in the American spirit, but
All
yeah,
right, so fill
either
me
way.
in on Berlin right now because there's when you got there, it was not like so. I'm coming in a couple days to El Salvador for the halving party, then to visit El Zante, kind of see Bitcoin Beach, and then there is a conference that you have primarily helped. I mean, there's obviously a lot of help, but it's one of kind of your brainchild happening in Berlin. I just want to know, can you describe even the evolution in the little bit of time you've been there? Because you're in a brand new Bitcoin center in Berlin. You've made a lot of new friends in a very short amount of time, and even more businesses have onboarded. So just even in the rapid short amount of time that you've been there, it's changed. Can you just kind of describe what's happening?
Yeah, well, it's a lot. First of all, I should say economy of Bitcoin is 50-50, me and Charlie Stevens. I'm sort
Okay,
of like the creative director. He's more like the chief operations officer and chief financial officer in terms of like
nice.
how our roles divide. And I was also the one who so I had some sort of vague idea of spin-off events for the having party, but it wasn't really until I moved here, got to know Charlie, and we talked a lot that I like got to know each other that we realized it would actually be possible to do this together. He has events experience. He's actually fluent in Spanish, and he also comes from a Big Four accounting background, so like the budget side of things, he was just able to handle that side of things. I had some clout in the Bitcoin world, like social media, like kind of known. I'd actually through the fall I'd started going on spaces, including a lot. Josie Redhead
Okay.
Libertarian. She has like 600,000 followers on X, and I've spoken to over 100,000 people about Bitcoin just through that alone.
Well,
But
and you organized the with Josie, you kind of brought together Josh Smith, the presidential libertarian candidate, to do a Bitcoin space. Did Rectenwald ever do one? I think he said he was in. I don't remember. Did he do one or not?
I asked him about Bitcoin in his campaign launch spaces with Josie. He said
Oh,
he was open to it and never really prioritized it in the way that Joshua did.
right.
But yeah, I
But
was.
anyway, I mean, you're actually, this is what I mean when I said in the very beginning of this podcast that you're kind of acting behind the scenes in a lot of different ways. Like you're actually one of the power players kind of in the Liberty Bitcoin movement. As far as at least connecting and organizing and pushing ideas out through some other people's bigger channels,
Yeah,
but
it's funny. Like
earning some goodwill.
yeah, it's funny. I wouldn't really say power. It's more I just suggest things, and when they're good enough ideas, people agree with them, and then they could just kind of happen. And
That's
that's kind of what happened with
influence is a
economy of
form of power.
Bitcoin.
Yeah.
Is we like yeah. So I had some idea of spin-off events after the having party. Getting to know Charlie, we realized that it would be possible to actually do like make this into reality together. And then especially the Bitcoin Berlin was none of it would be possible without this incredible new circular economy as the base a reason for people to come here. It actually have an event like this was also what motivated the event is showing people that it's possible to actually live full time on a Bitcoin standard here. Um, I don't know. We're already at an hour, but there's I don't know.
Yeah, no, I mean, just keep. So you got to at least talk about what's happening in Berlin. This was the whole build up to this episode. You gotta talk
Yeah.
about Berlin.
Okay.
So what's going on? Like, how many? Like, what is the Bitcoin economy? I know it's possible to live in Berlin full time on Bitcoin. What percentage of people are actually like kind of doing it versus? I guess just what's the economic picture? How many stores are taking it? What are the expectations? What's the belief in Bitcoin? And how has that changed since you first got there?
Yeah. So in terms of percentages, if you want to think about it's still early stage. So I would say the percentage that matters most is percentage of growth. And things have been, uh,
Right.
exponential here over the past year since the circular economy was started. It started, Gerardo and Evelyn, two Salvadorans, decided to settle in Berlin, and they orange pilled the first 20 merchants by themselves. And in about a year since then, the number has grown to what over 100 local merchants now accept Bitcoin payments.
Wow. It was
We've
70
had
the last time I heard. And that was like, what, 2 months ago? Was you were bragging about 70 and now it's 100?
It's been crazy how quickly it's gone. I should have actually been tracking out the exact data points. There's always so many things going on. There's always more that can be done, and
Sure.
that's actually a point. Is if people are interested, this is an incredible place to grow and really make a difference in all sorts of different ways. And it's actually a lot of freelancers on the team too. Like Andre at Design Sats on Twitter, he's been doing all the graphic design for Economy of Bitcoin.
Nice.
Yeah, like different like writing and there are a lot of different ways to get involved in the Bitcoin community. Like the economic opportunities are emerging. This is an emerging market and it's still early stages, but we're also seeing that with like the farmers market down in El Zonte, businesses actually opening up out of that. There's
Yeah.
the Bitcoin hardware store just opened up in El Zonte to enable distribution of Bitcoin technology. More educational initiatives are being done to scale out Bitcoin education for actually using that technology throughout the country. And Berlin, we really see as a hub, establishing a second hub within El Salvador for passionate Bitcoiners who want to learn, live full time, and then actually start, creating their own businesses as well over time. Is grow this entire parallel or circular economy together on a resilient, anti-fragile monetary system. Um, yeah, it's happening here up in Citadel Mountain, Bitcoin Berlin.
And when is the conference that you're hosting, and what can people expect if it'll be very last minute at this point? But there might be a few tickets left.
Yes.
So
So it is Economy of Bitcoin on April 8th after the halving party. The halving party is Wednesday, Thursday, Friday at a resort in Sonsonate on the western half of the country. And 3 days all inclusive. That you and I are both going to that. I'll actually be speaking at that a little bit about Bitcoin Berlin. And then after that, people are going to Bitcoin Beach, El Zonte, for the weekend. There'll be surf contest, volleyball, meetup, and then the farmers market on Sunday morning. And then we have shuttles from there bringing people up to Berlin to spend that night, Sunday night. And then April 8th, Monday, they wake up in Berlin. Conference starts at 9 a.m. We have all sorts of great speakers for various aspects. The builders in education and technology for the toolkit of creating a circular economy. And we've also got some well-known Bitcoin speakers who are doing virtual talks. Lawrence Lepard, a macroeconomic expert who actually specializes, former gold bug, giving like the big picture perspective on the monetary evolution. Texas Slim, founder of the Beef Initiative, which was my first ever Lightning transaction back in the U.S. Really pioneering supply chains of beef for Bitcoin in the US, and then they're starting to scale internationally in Australia and Thailand. And so he'll give a talk about scaling out beef supply chains for a parallel Bitcoin economy. And then Alex Svetsky, a well-known Bitcoin entrepreneur and author, will also be doing a remote talk about Noster and circular economies and how that can tie in with, essentially the pitch for Noster is censorship resistant, a new way of doing the internet where you own your data. But
Yeah.
anyway, he'll also be sending a dev to give workshops on that. We'll have workshops on how to run nodes, all sorts of like really like serious Bitcoin tools, like the toolkit for building more of these circular economies. Because I think this is one of the most important developments in the world.
Right.
And it's an open source model. Bitcoin itself is open source. We want more people to see what's working here, to copy it. Bitcoin Beach is not for everyone. Bitcoin Berlin is not going to be for everyone in terms of the ideal place to live. But we want people to at least be able to see what's succeeding in such an unbelievable way here, but realize it's actually not unbelievable. It's accessible, and it's
Yeah,
so
this is
easy
the
that a grandma or a kid can do it, and anybody can get started and take the next step. And that's really what we were hoping to show here.
there's kind of two things that I'm looking forward to seeing in Berlin. And part of it is the just inaction that look, there's a city, like it's 25,000 people or so. It's not huge, but that's a real city in the world. Like it's a functional city. It has everything. And there's people there. It's functioning on Bitcoin. So just watching it in action is one thing. And then a lot of it might be too technical for some people, but like how it's working. Here are the tools that are actually enabling this. I think is a thing that a lot of people, it's just like I had to show my aunt, like, here's how you actually would take Bitcoin. Here's how you would send Bitcoin. Just seeing the tools that make it possible, I think makes it more real and understandable, and understand the potential scale and the size that it could scale to. Just seeing everything in one place, and then generating my own ideas, honestly, for like what else can I do? Like, where could I fit into this economy? Because I think a lot of people, when they understand how fast it's going to grow, are going to, this is the place to be. You want to be in the hyper growth spot if you're at all entrepreneurial, or you like growth. This is you. Then you want to see how to grow, and I think it's one of the more exciting opportunities in the world. In Berlin, as a sleepy little former mountain town, it's formerly sleepy, I should say. It's one of the more exciting places to be. So, uh, what's the website that people can go to if they want to get the last minute tickets to Berlin?
I will send you the link for the bio, the show notes. Go to
Yeah.
Economia BTC on Twitter or X or whatever. It's also economiabtc.substack.com for a little more information. But the Twitter is the main one. You can go to my Twitter at JeThoreau, JeThoreau, like Henry David Thoreau. I have my own Substack where I do my weekly Thoreau Thursdays. Um, I don't know. Should
And your podcast, pitch your podcast.
Yeah, and I've got my podcast. Henry was actually on the panel for my first ever episode with Clint Russell, Michelle Weekly, and Rustin at Sats for Life, Chief of Growth Officer and Head of News at Simply Bitcoin, and that was a really cool episode. And Clint actually, it was right before he went off to Iowa for the Iowa, the primary there, and with Tim Cast and Vivek's team. And Clint also announced his candidacy for vice president of the United States in that
On
episode.
your podcast. Yep, that was crazy. That was hilarious.
Yeah, so
Making history already. Big things happening in Berlin, including U.S. presidential announcements. So who knew?
it's been a lot to keep up with, and I really just dove headfirst in here, and I'm sure we'll talk again more another time.
Absolutely. Well,
this is only an hour, and I feel like we barely scratched the surface, but
there's so much more to cover. And hey, we'll do a live recording when I'm there.
cool. Yep, we got the studio for it now, so
All
cool.
right. Thank you so much. And ladies and gentlemen, until next time, stay free.